Please welcome James Bird, EV Section Manager at Nissan Motor GB.
Good morning. Great to have you with me. Just as an introduction, my name is James Bird. I work at Nissan GB. I'm EV Manager there. And I'm going to be covering off some of the myths, some of the fear elements, some of the uncertainties, some of the doubts we have as we move towards a more electrified future for mobility. I guess just as a very quick introduction, although with my Nissan hat on, I have an agenda on EV. My job here is not to crowbar you into an EV. It's just to give you information and facts. And as I go through, I'm going to share all of my references, all of my sources on everything I tell you, so you can investigate it for yourself. But as we go through, I'm going to give you a very, very quick introduction of what Nissan is about and why I think we're qualified in terms of promoting EV and what that looks like going forward. So, just in terms of Nissan's operation in the UK, today we have a number of facilities across the UK. The first one is our manufacturing site up in Sunderland. That produces up to 500,000 units per year. 85% is export. And across that, we build hybrids, we build EVs, and we build a different kind of hybrid called e-Power. In addition, we have a parts facility in Lutterworth. We have an engineering facility in Cranfield. So all of the cars that are sold in UK are engineered for UK roads. And we also have a technical design centre and design centre in Paddington, London. And that means that we design our cars for our market as well. So we do have a very big footprint in the UK. But over the last 6 months or so, you may have seen some investment that Nissan has committed to in the UK. And one of those is £3 billion of investment into that Sunderland plant. £3 billion going into 3 gigafactories, into a new series of vehicles that will be manufactured on that line, but also a microgrid. So we're going to offset the carbon that we use in manufacturing through our wind farm and a new solar array as well. But Nissan, as a manufacturer, we're not new to the EV game. We've been selling EVs since about 2010 with the Generation 1 Leaf. And actually, since that time, globally, we've sold over 1 million EVs. So again, we're not new to the game. We're coming to it from a bit of experience, a bit of knowledge, a bit of know-how, and we're going to share some of those thoughts today. The 2 EVs that we have in market today that you can see on our stand, one for test drive will be the Leaf EV, the other one is the Aria, so dedicated EV-only models. So let's look at some of these I guess, hesitations around EV adoption, and I'm going to go through 6. Now, this won't cover everything, and we'll have some questions at the end, I hope, to maybe unpick some of the more detailed hesitations that you may have. But the first one, are electric vehicles expensive? There might be that assumption that some of you have, and hopefully today we can see that there are plenty of models in the market. But just from Nissan's standpoint, we have 2 propositions. We have Nissan Leaf, which is our hatchback family vehicle. That starts with a nil advance payment, up to a maximum of $299. And then we have Aria. So Aria, a much larger SUV, slightly longer than Qashqai, about 17 centimeters longer, and that starts at about $1,999 for a big battery Engage, or for a slightly smaller battery, you can have the next grade up, which is the Advance. And those ranges are really important. So the accessibility of those cars gives you a range of 168 miles on a Leaf, or up to 330 on an Aria. So again, depending on your mileage profile, we have an option that will suit you. But one of the things we need to take into consideration when we look at EVs is total cost of ownership, or TCO, and what happens when you compare petrol to energy. And does that give an advantage to offset some of those initial payments? Well, in the red bars that you can see on the slide here, we have 3 different scenarios. We have 3 consumers who are charging differently to use their EV. The first customer, they're charging pretty much at home. 80% they're charging at home, and they're going to use an overnight tariff. So we get a lower energy cost for charging overnight. And that cost gives them an annual fuel bill, 10,000 miles, of £452. If we compare that to petrol, for the same mileage over the same year, it's about £1,357. So actually, it's less than half the cost if it's being charged in that way. Those costs could be cheaper if you charged exclusively at home. So if you never use the public network, that could be around about £300. So again, about £1,000 saving from EV versus petrol. If you have a more balanced usage profile, even if you charged exclusively in the public network, it would still be cheaper than fuel. Now, this data point comes from ZapMap. ZapMap are the largest data provider in the UK for charging POI data, but also prices. So it's a really good reference point to have a look and see and compare what these different customer profiles do for cost. So here's another question then. Does an EV drive as well as my petrol or diesel car? And I guess if we've never driven an EV, there can be that misconception that it's going to feel a bit like a milk float. There's a great opportunity here today that you can test drive cars. But does it drive as well as a petrol or diesel? And there's a number of really good advantages that EVs offer because they don't have to follow the constraints that a petrol or diesel vehicle does. So first of all, I'm going to compare Aria here. Now, Aria is a bespoke EV platform. It can never be fitted with a petrol or diesel engine. And that means that we can make quite radical architectural and design decisions because of the packaging optimization of that car. So we can stretch the wheels right into the corners. We don't have to compensate for an engine under the bonnet. And that gives it a very big, long wheelbase, and it gives a huge amount of interior space. In terms of the packaging on the motor and the battery, they're put as low down into the floor as possible to give a low center of gravity and to improve handling. And we also run the cross members. The spine of the car runs through the battery casing, and that makes it incredibly stiff. So handling, limited body roll, all of those things are improved because of the decisions made on an EV versus a petrol diesel vehicle. What we can also do is we can regenerate energy in an EV much more efficiently than in a petrol or diesel car. So that motor that's propelling you along, when you come off the accelerator, that motor goes into reverse and it pumps energy back into the battery. With an EV, you also have two really big advantages versus a petrol or diesel car. And often we look at diesel cars or petrol cars with turbos because they feel responsive, because they have a high amount of power. They feel good to drive. With an EV, though, you actually get a lot more bang for your buck. And the reason I say that is because motors offer the maximum amount of torque for virtually 0 RPM. So if you think of it in this way, if you think of power is the punch of an engine or punch of a motor, torque, that's how quickly you can deliver that punch. And when you have an EV motor, it has very, very high torque at 0 RPM. So that immediacy, the things we love about diesel or petrol cars, that's what an EV is able to offer. On the inside, it's also quite radical. So one thing we can do is we can take the heating, ventilation, the AC unit that usually sits under the dashboard in most cars. On an Aria, we flip that 180 degrees and we put it under the bonnet. And that means you get a huge amount of more space. So underneath, you can probably see there, just underneath the dashboard, if you come and look at our car on the stand, there's a huge amount of legroom because there is no heating ventilation system under the dashboard. That's been put bonnet side as well. The interior on the floor pan is completely flat as well. There's no tunnel. There's no bulges in the carpet. It is completely flat across the front of the car and the rear of the car, really helping access as well. So hopefully that gives you a flavor of where an EV excels versus a petrol and diesel car. It can be cheaper if you charge exclusively at home. Even if you use the public network, it's cheaper than filling up with fuel, and they drive really well. But how do I charge an EV? Well, with the Motability scheme, we have a partnership with Omi who provide a home charger for you. And to give you an idea of what charging times that will deliver, there are three kind of ways you can charge an Aria. The first one is to charge at home on your single-phase supply. So your home will take about 7 kilowatts maximum output for your charger. And when that goes into a Nissan Aria, if you have a small battery car that does about 250 miles, that would charge from flat in 10 hours. If you had a big battery car, so 330 miles of range, that would charge from flat in about 13 hours. However, Aria can charge a lot quicker than that. So if, for example, you're out and about, you're going to the gym or the cinema, Aria can charge at 22 kilowatts at those destination charge points, which means you can charge in 3 hours or 4 hours. But if you really want ultra-rapid charging at a service station, absolutely we can do that as well. So 20 to 100% is about half an hour, 35 minutes from those kind of charge times. So that's charging at 130 kilowatts. Now, why is there a difference between AC and DC charging? So your home is going to charge with AC, but if you go to a service station, that's going to charge in DC. And that's because your home runs on AC, and when we put that energy into the car, it has to go through an inverter because it stores the energy in DC in the battery. When we charge at a service station on a DC charger, that goes straight into the battery with no need for the inverter. And that is why there's differences in charge time between when you charge at home and when you charge at a service station. So what about chargers in the network? Often we kind of have doubts around how many chargers there truly are, how many are going in. Are we going to see enough as the EV, I guess, total number of drivers increases? Well, at the moment today, again, this data is from ZapMap, there are 32,000 charger locations. That's 60,000 devices, 90,000 connectors. So that's two charge points usually there's two connectors usually on each charge point. And in the last month, 2,300 new chargers went in. So what does that look like on a glide path in terms of location? Well, predominantly a lot of the chargers are in the southeast, but they're growing all the time. And that's usually down to residential density or population density. So a lot of it is in Greater London at the moment, but it is getting better all the time. In terms of the growth across the whole of the UK, we actually clicked over not 50,000, but 60,000 charge points last month. And we're on track to deliver 100,000 charge points in the public domain by the summer of next year. The target for the government by 2030 is 300,000. So on the current trajectory, assuming that the growth is the same, that will happen. And that will give us a great position for EV adoption more widely. So where does the electricity come from with an EV? And this is another question we often can worry about a little bit in terms of, well, does an EV just turn emissions from a tailpipe into emissions from a power station, from a gas power station or coal power station? And that is one of those things that I guess we wrestle with because we're trying to make the good decisions perhaps in choosing an EV. Maybe it isn't just an economic decision. Maybe it's because we want to have a more sustainable outlook on our driving habits, our mobility. So where does the electricity come from to charge an EV? Well, we have to look at our grid for that. And a great source of data is from energydashboard.co.uk. And this is taken from when I built this presentation, so it's not from this morning. But it gives you a live dashboard of where energy comes from in the grid today. In fact, by the hour, you can see it by the minute, how much of the energy in the UK is being generated from what sources. So when I ran this particular example, 48.2% of energy in the grid in the UK was coming from pure renewable. So around about 2.9 gigawatts was coming from solar, 13.7 was coming from wind, and then a little bit from hydro. So 48% of the total grid supply at 6:25 on this particular day was coming from pure renewables. And actually, the average energy production from the grid last year in the UK was 49% renewables, which is brilliant. And that's because the UK is really uniquely positioned for wind generation, for solar, for hydro, because of our coastline, because we have the Irish Sea, we have the North Atlantic, we have, I guess, the Outer Hebrides and Scotland, which gives us incredibly sustainable wind supply that we can harness and make the most of to offset the non-renewables in our grid. And one of the big advantages to using wind power specifically is that wind is typically strongest overnight. And when you're charging your car, typically, in order to maximize your efficiency, to maximize your savings using an off-peak tariff, you would charge overnight. So all of that wind generation that's going on overnight, that then goes into the battery for your car and offsets it, giving you very, very low carbon for the mileage that you do. One of the other things that's really important about the grid is that as the grid continues to green up, it continues to get more efficient, it continues to use more renewables, EVs get cleaner. A petrol car is always a petrol car. It will always burn fossil fuel. But an EV can get cleaner as the grid improves. So how far can I really drive on a single charge? Big question. Nissan, amongst other manufacturers, we publish data on how far our vehicles go. And that data is called a WLTP figure. It's a homologated figure. It's assessed through a lab test on a rolling road with various conditions and driving scenarios that gives a stated standard range output that can be comparable against any other manufacturer for this market. But is that really real? You're going to tell me, James, yeah, what about when it's freezing cold on a Sunday morning, and will I still get the same amount of range that you've published? Well, at Nissan, we build a tool, actually, for you to go and investigate that for yourselves. And usefully, we're going to make use of the skills that we have in our Cranfield Engineering Center. And our engineers there built this tool, which is on our nissan.co.uk website. And you can toggle any number of scenarios to see what the range input is. I've got a couple of examples for you here. So this is a Nissan Ariya. It's a big battery car. It's 87 kilowatts. That's the size of the battery. That's the size of the fuel tank, if you like. It's running on 19-inch alloy wheels, and it has 1 or 2 people in it, so solo occupancy. It's not got a full family. Average speed for this particular journey is 45 miles per hour. The eco mode is on, and the outside temperature is quite warm. It's 20 degrees. It's about the temperature of today. The estimated range on that car is 333 miles. That's pretty much exactly what we would quote from the WLTP range. It's about 330. So what happens then if we change something? But before we do that, let's look at some impartial testing from Whatcar. So Whatcar did some testing in winter range across a whole range of different EVs in market. And they said, in cold climate, what is the loss of the range because of the cold conditions? And they gave this benchmark. So Nissan Ariya performed the best. That's their words, not mine. And Ariya lost 16.4% of its range. It went from 322 miles to 269 in cold climate. What's interesting, though, about this is if you run a petrol or diesel car, that too uses more fuel in cold climate. The US Department of Energy did a study a couple of years ago, and they found that in cold climate, a petrol or diesel car will use 15% more fuel. In fact, if it's using a short journey and the engine is not warm, it uses 20% more fuel. So actually what you see here in terms of overall losses in the EV segment, and more notably Ariya, is that it's comparable with your petrol or diesel car. But let's go back to that scenario. Let's go back to this car that we had. So 333 miles, ambient temperature. What will our tool tell you if we change something? So I'm going to change the temperature down to 5 degrees. And our engineers are more conservative than Whatcar. They gave a different view, but they said the range impact was a loss of 82 miles. 251 miles is what we've stated. OK, so in cold climate, you get less. But what about in really warm climate? What happens if you change the speed of your cruise? So for some of you, you'll be using an EV for trips to the shop, maybe just town use. Maybe most of your journeys are in 30-mile-an-hour zones, so your average speed will be a lot lower. What then happens to range under the same conditions? And our engineers did the same testing. So let's look at what happens if we change that average speed to 20 miles per hour. We get 487 miles. Enormous ranges. Again, speed is the big killer of EV range because of the drag of the air on that vehicle. So you can see it's very, very sensitive, more sensitive to speed than perhaps temperature, but in all cases, we're able to share this information with you to make an informed choice on the nissan.co.uk website. So are EVs reliable? Really good question. Are they reliable? There's been a lot of stuff in the press around fires, around other things, which I'm happy to talk about. But purely on EVs reliable, I'm going to talk from a Nissan standpoint here, because I think that's really important, that we have confidence in what we say on our product. And I can't speak for other manufacturers, but I can speak for Nissan. So 2 scenarios of what we've achieved on EV. First one is we have a Nissan Ariya that drove from the North Pole to the South Pole. Apart from the very big off-road tires and a bit of a lift kit on the suspension, that car was standard. It ran standard motors. It ran a standard battery. The interior was totally standard as well. 30,000 kilometers, no problem. We've also sold, as I said at the start, 1 million EVs to date. And Nissan Leaf, which has sold around 650,000 of that total, achieved a 96.9% reliability score from Whatcar in 2023. It was also voted the best car for city drivers in 2023 as well. So we have proven reliability both in our volume from Nissan, but also in what we achieve from second sources, from independent testing. So yeah, really strong in terms of reliability. There's around 100 times less moving parts in an EV versus an internal combustion engine, so a lot less to go wrong. Just as a final close before I open the floor to questions, all of the reference points that I've shared today are available in the public domain. You can go and check it. And I will point to a few sources that are really worth exploring and reading to give yourself more information. The first one is the Little Book of EV Myths. It's a free download from a company called faircharge.co.uk. They're supported by the REC, they're supported by Fully Charged and Recharge UK as well. And they tackle around 20 or so myths around EV adoption. It's a brilliant bit of resource, and again, they reference every single source of information and data point for you to challenge, interrogate, look at yourself. In addition, ZapMap are brilliant. So look at ZapMap. They have the best amount of data, or coverage data, EPOI data, or charging point data in the UK. Definitely worth looking at that because they offer some really good insights, particularly on the trajectory of new charger installs. Another really good reference point is Energy Dashboard. So that model I showed you at the start of where does our energy come from on the grid, if you want to see what it's like today, have a look at Energy Dashboard. See where our grid is actually producing. How renewable is it, and how does it improve going forward? And the last two references would be OMI and Wattcar. So OMI are the charger provider for your home charging, and Wattcar provide those reliability surveys as well. The final place to say it's a really good source of information is the nissan.co.uk website. Of course, you can come and speak to me on the stand. I'll be there all day. But absolutely, the nissan.co.uk website answers a lot of some of the questions that you may have. But that's it from me, actually, in terms of content. We can go on to some questions. So, Louise, please, any questions?
If you're stuck in a traffic jam with
Yep.
the aircon going and the lights on, does that reduce the
range?
Yes.
So lights, no, so that they're on the 12-volt system. So there's a different battery for your radio, for example, and your lighting system. Air conditioning would, but our cars run heat pumps, so they are very, very efficient. If you've got the heating on or the cooling on, it will erode the range, but a minimal amount. In fact, we ran one of our cars stationary in the summer sun all day at a stand with the aircon blazing on. It lost about 5% on a full day. So that's the kind of impact I would expect.
What about, say you was going somewhere 150 miles on a motorway?
Yep.
How would it affect the engine and how would it work?
In terms of the range or the performance?
Well, what would be left in the battery at the end of that?
So again, we can go on that tool and we can see a high-speed scenario. So one of the figures I know that cruising at 65 miles per hour in 5 degrees centigrade would drop the range to about 200 miles from a 330-mile start point. Now, what I would say, that would be cruising at an average of 65 miles an hour. It's unlikely you'd be cruising at that speed, so that will give you a lot more range in reality. But speed does give a higher reduction of energy, or I guess of energy use, versus slower speed. So it's something we can absolutely go through, and you can look at yourself on the nissan.co.uk website, but I would expect it would be around 2/3 of the battery stated range would be lost at that kind of speed.
If I was to look at the Auto Trader website or something like that, and I have a look at a Nissan Leaf from 10, 15 years ago, I see some with battery ranges of about 30, 50 miles. In modern technology, how has battery technology sort of protected against the battery deteriorating over 3 or 4 years of maybe a Motability contract?
Sure. So at Nissan, all of our batteries are guaranteed to 75% capacity over 8 years. So over 3 or 4 years in your usual Motability contract, not even a concern. And if there was any degradation at all outside of that kind of limit, we would intervene and look to repair that battery for you. On those older vehicles that we're looking at, some of them are way out of that warranty threshold. They may have also had very, very small batteries to start with. So going back to 2010, when we launched Leaf, it had a 20 kilowatt-hour battery. We now have an 87 kilowatt-hour battery. That's the kind of level of progress that we have. And at Nissan, we're working on the next generation of batteries with solid state. So rather than using a liquid electrolyte, we're going to use solid state batteries going forward.
Just a quick question. Probably aside of Motability, but just the general market for EVs, the second-hand sale of EVs, given the battery range, say it's 10 years, for example, how do you see the EV market from a second-hand market sale perspective?
Yeah, sure. So the data that we have and some studies that were done more recently around Tesla batteries, I can quote this because it's again in the little the EV Myths book, they saw around 15% degradation over 10 years. So that opens the opportunity for these batteries to be used in second life applications. So that could be using battery storage in your home. If you had solar panels, you could store that energy when your car is not available to put energy into the vehicle. It could also be used in commercial battery storage. So there's lots of options for even when the car battery has degraded or the chassis is no longer viable as a mobility solution, that battery has a value, a huge value, because it has rare earth materials inside of it that we would then want to use. And going forward, Nissan will have a recycling facility. It will offer second life batteries for home and commercial purposes.
I live in Nottingham, but I have family in Scotland, family down south. Now I would be worried about range, anxiety. Are service stations that much more expensive than normal chargers?
Yeah, so if you're charging at home, you'll be charging at 8 pence per kilowatt. If you're charging at a service station, it's more like 70 pence per kilowatt, but it's still cheaper than fuel. If you went back to my original slide, it was still about £150 cheaper over a full year charging. So it does have a higher cost because of the requirement to charge on the move, in the same way that if you filled up your car from a service station, you would be prepared to spend 40 pence, 50 pence per litre in order to use that facility. I guess one way of checking that is through ZapMap. They give you that best data. And from Nissan today, we give you 3 years free subscription to ZapMap Premium. So you get that data in the car whenever you buy an EV from us. Okay? Any more? Last question. No? We're done. Thank you so much thank you. I'll be back on the stand, so do come and find me. Thank you so much for your attention. That was brilliant.